Hey, I'm Patrick Newman, and this week I am going to be giving you my initial thoughts on the Panasonic Lumix GH5. Alright, so I bought the Panasonic GH5 about a month ago for a handful of projects, and ever since I've been extremely excited about it. I really like the image I get out of this camera. I had worked with the GH4 a lot before, and I wasn't really impressed with the Micro Four Thirds sensor. Even in well-lit situations, I felt like the darks were coming in super noisy. Even though that camera is great for its time, it just never really worked for me, and I didn't feel comfortable using it. But Panasonic has answered those issues with the GH5. This camera has 10-bit internal 4K, which is usually not seen in a camera like this, like a DSLR, but more like a camera that's in the $5,000 to $10,000 range, like the FS7, which is where we've seen it classically. But those are two very different codecs. This 10-bit codec comes in at 400 megabits per second and 150 megabits per second. Now that's the codec that I am more interested in. The 400 megabits per second codec is a little bit too big for especially a budget camera that you're trying to go with, right? You're trying to save a little bit of money on your projects, so it doesn't make sense to get a 400 megabit per second codec that's going to take up more room on a hard drive than your red. With some of those initial thoughts being said, let's take a look at the body of this camera. Now the body of this camera is weather sealed, it is extremely durable, and it's a little bit larger than the Sony a7R II. Now that makes it so that ergonomically it feels really nice in your hands to be able to go out and shoot. And just to make it a little bit better, I decided to throw on a small rig cage that has a top handle, and I rigged out this side handle just for a little bit more comfort shooting. I've really enjoyed the way that this rig works. I think it's kind of necessary to the setup. It just makes it that much better and that much more valuable when you're going out and shooting. Now the other big bonus that the GH5 has is that all of the buttons on the camera are customizable. That means that you can adapt this camera to really tend to the way that you want to shoot, which is something that the other camera lines don't do. Canon doesn't do that, Sony doesn't do that, and frankly I think it's something that Panasonic and the GH5 have really championed over the years, and is something that I didn't realize how much I missed until I started using this camera. Now one of the big features that I absolutely loved is this monitor. You can articulate this monitor however you want off the side of the camera, so it can point straight up, straight down, however you want. And this is super valuable for vlogging like this. Now I'm not very big into vlogging, but this feature is super nice. Like I can check myself out right here, see my audio levels, make sure it's still recording, which is something that I missed in the Sony lines, because that little monitor on the back just kind of pitches down or pitches up. And I've really truly felt like this monitor gives me a very true image to what I am producing and what I'm shooting, whereas on other cameras that has not been the case most of the time. Canons are pretty good. Sony's are a bit off. It's made me suffer quite a bit when shooting. But the big thing with this, and this is the only thing I really don't like with this monitor, is that it doesn't lock brightness. So it has a small auto brightness, and you can have it so it's on a low scale, but still there, so it still changes the brightness of the monitor, which can change your perception of your exposure. And I wish that this was fixed. I'm sure they'll fix it eventually in some software update, but it's something to think about and something to keep an eye on. The other cool thing about this monitor is that it is a touchscreen, making it so that you can work your way through the menus any which way you can, either through this, through the circular dials on the back, through the joystick. It really gives every option that most cameras don't give, or usually the camera will give you one of those options, and I absolutely love having all the options to choose from. Most of the time I stick away from using the touchscreen because I'm kind of a dirty guy, and I get the monitor super messy, and it makes it hard to shoot with. Alright, so the sensor on this camera is a micro four thirds, just like the GH4 before it, but the camera itself has a little bit of a cooler trick than the GH4. It has 10-bit internal 4K video, which makes it so that that log footage that you're getting out of this camera has a bit more oomph to it when you go back to color it, and you can cover some of those darks and you can bring in some of those lights and really get the skin tones a lot better than you can the GH4. And the other cool trick that this camera has with the sensor is a 5-axis stabilization, which means when you go on trips like I did down to the Bahamas, you don't really need all of that stabilization gear. You don't need a Ronin S or Ronin or all that stuff. It really makes this camera the one-man band camera, and that's really what I was looking for, something that I could go shoot trips with, something that I could go shoot a client with that I didn't need a full crew. And that's, I think, where this camera shines, is that you can get away with just this camera. And we were going into places like Chichen Itza where you really are supposed to have permits for any type of video camera, but I got in with this camera because it looks so small and it looks so unprofessional in a lot of ways that I could go into places that most people wouldn't be able to go to with a proper cinema camera or any type of a bigger camera. Now, with the GH5 having a micro four thirds sensor, that doesn't mean all micro four thirds sensors are the same. Panasonic just came out with the GH5S a couple of months ago, which is a low light beast. And the only reason why I did not go with that camera is because it did not have the internal stabilization, which is the biggest mistake I think they could have made. This camera really shines with that stabilization. I don't know why they wouldn't include it in that camera. It would have been gangbusters, but maybe that's why they didn't include it, so that they can keep moving the GH5 off the shelf and not just have everything move over to the GH5S. I don't know, I'd like to ask them why, but let me know what your thoughts are on the GH5 and how you feel about working with this camera. If there's any tricks that you feel like I overlooked, please let me know, and leave a comment down below. Please subscribe and like for more, and I'll see you guys next time.